Good morning, and today we have forensics. I'm going to share a PowerPoint in a minute. I told you guys on Tuesday that we're going to do a lot of symbology and mythology in this class. So today's class is very heavy in myth, and next week's class is going to be very heavy in symbols. I do have some symbols in this class. So these myths are super important. I told you the other day that these gods are called chthonic gods. The chthonic gods are considered to be rulers of the underworld or under sort of the oceans, if you will. So oftentimes when we hear the word hell, I told you about Lucifer, it's related to below. And what it's really talking about is the subconscious. So this is sort of the root of not becoming the criminal and really liberating yourself. I am going to share with you the map again of the spiritual adulting map, and you're going to see that after you sort of blow up your life and you get out of the toxic waters and seek the cosmic consciousness, that then Pluto comes on the way up the map. And this is all related to Pluto. So I'm going to share with you several different gods from different traditions, so you can see how important this symbolism is. This is the root of depth psychology. This is the root of Jungian psychology. This is the root of everything for transcendence in achieving the 48 to 52. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see that? So again, consider the crime, not the criminal. We're the criminal. And what happens in terms of the society, if we go back to the principle of mentalism and all is mind and the principle of correspondence, everything is a mirror. The criminal system or criminals in your life, no matter, on a scale of 1 to 10, are representing you. So when we did the game of life, I told you about the different archetypes, and this is specifically the Pluto archetype, and you have the handout of the descriptors of how that's going to show up in you and in your clients. So there's a few objectives today. This is a very jam-packed class that I'll cover between today and next week. You are the criminal. We kind of have to buy into this. Your psyche stores the crime. That's why these chthonic gods represent the psyche and the depths of the psyche, inaccessible just at the normal consciousness. The archetype we're working with in our language is the Pluto, and the poster in the classroom is linked to the magician, and that's the highest vibration of how Pluto shows up. He is linked to your spiritual riches and material riches. He actually is in charge of the mineral world, and when we do get to the psychological homeostasis, at some point I'm going to link it to the physical homeostasis, and we're going to talk about the actual physical minerals in our body and what they do and how they represent spirituality. He is why you pay up for God to save you, and I'm going to go into that more. You are the only perpetrator in your life. You are also the victim and the rescuer. We're going to go into that. So last month I had you dethroning your parents. This month I'm going to have you dethroning God. So we're going to see that today. Your crimes are linked to the deadly sins. Remember I told you the other day that Pluto leads you to the truth, the hidden truths, which is, my brand, because that's Lilith. And we do have Chiron in the middle, and we will talk about the homeostasis in terms of not only the psyche, but the body and why illness is involved. But the deadly sins are in essence what the thought is, that impure thought we're trying to save from our parents that we're paying up for. And we'll go deeper into that the rest of the month. It's also known as Shadrupus in Hindu philosophy, and vices. We hear of the vices and virtues in Christianity, in Nicomachean ethics. So these are sort of the similar words. These are your link to your freedom. These are the link to getting your 48 to 52. We're going to talk about that. And BLM is your Black Moon Lilith. And this is the ascent back to heaven. So this is your death on the cross, the 8th house in astrology. And then Jesus ascended back to heaven with the resurrection. You resurrect once the perpetrator or Pluto affects your life. Your body harms you with psychological homeostasis. It keeps the secrets of your parents, and you eventually crack and pay heavily with a severe loss, crisis, grief, or illness to liberate that secret and seek truth. My hope for you and for humanity is that we can eliminate as much as possible the illness, the need for illness, the need to get severely sick like I did in order to liberate the secret, that it can be much more of a smoother transition with maybe, a day of sadness or a cold, and not have to develop these severe diseases that we do in order to materialize the thought into the body that eventually cracks open and liberates. Our first perpetrator is the father, and obviously your father penetrates your mother, so that's how it's described in the psyche. The thing is, and I'm going to go into deeper, the father is the alpha, the spirit is the omega. You're going to know in the Bible, and we'll go to that verse where in Revelations it says, I am the alpha and the omega. And this is literally the body and the spirit, that you are both like Jesus. You need to balance your material and your spiritual. Your next perpetrator, of course, is your body. When you are conceived. Of course, I told you that the transition of the birth process, the world, is another perpetrator. And you learned, like we covered on Tuesday, that you were the rescuer to the victim, which was mom. So mom got perpetrated by dad, she's the victim, you're the child, and you become the rescuer. There's a lot of weight in that role, and we'll go into it subconsciously. Transitions are always birth. We're going to go into Stanislav Grof's 4 stages of the birth process and link to my theory. Your first sexual experience, and that's determined by your client, whether it was masturbation, penetration, or just touching from another person. And then the ultimate transition, which is death. And I told you that these Pluto transits are super important because they teach you how to die, the ultimate death, which is leaving the body and going back to the universal consciousness. At age 42, we blow up our life in attempt to connect, get past the toxic waters of the womb, connect to the universal consciousness. But it's not until Pluto that we actually transcend and release ourselves of that and actually are able to do it. So this is a crucial process in subconscious, in the subconscious domain. And this is all Pluto. I told you about the skinny cows. The skinny cows is Saturn. Saturn is actually Pluto's father. You'll see that in the myth. And Saturn, the skinny cows, are there every 7 years with your neutralizer years and valor years to help you prepare for when Pluto comes. Because if not, you will not survive it. It is extremely, extremely strong. When you identify that you are the rescuer, and I've told you that all helping professions, and especially our profession, we are narcissists at heart, simply because we think that we can change someone's life, that we think we have an impact on someone's life. And this is what happened, is that I say we cooked, cleaned, and counseled our mother. That's just sort of a little adage that I have, and however you played that out. But you were here again as the rescuer of mom. And again, mom and dad, it could be either one. We're going to do some more triangle work today, whatever that bad bucket or wrong alliance is. And you think that you're here to save someone, and it's all in an attempt to meet your own needs. Remember, if your needs were not met at childhood and you save mom, maybe she'll love you enough unconditionally, which we know doesn't happen, and you get your needs met, and then we get into relationship and friendships and jobs, and we build on this false belief. So we are all narcissists simply, and I'm talking about threads of narcissism, not narcissistic personality disorder, because of this concept at this transition of birth. Now, I'm going to talk to you a lot this month about the age of Aquarius, and next week I'm going to explain in depth the symbolism of the Virgin Mary, the Mary Magdalene, the Heros Gamos that we talked about in the Truth is in the Triangle relationship model, and how this equates to you being a world servant, very different than trying to save someone by saving yourself, then you can help humanity, which is the point of the Age of Aquarius. We're also going to talk a lot of myths. Pluto, Jesus, Lucifer might seem ironic to have them in the same sentence, as we're sold that they're different, and they're not. Mary Magdalene, Inanna, Black Moon Lilith, Pan, Morgana, Kali, Merlin, they're all one archetype, and they basically represent bringing the secrets, those deadly sins or repos, to the light that we talked about with Lucifer and that alus when we're birthed. We're going to talk about the symbolism of the Vesica Pisces, which is the Heros Gamos from The Truth is in the Triangle. And if whatever we don't do today, we'll continue on to Tuesday. These are just the objectives for both days. We're going to talk about the Hydra, Cerberus, and we're going to talk about astrology, ascendant and generational planets. I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about Stanislav Grof, who is pretty much the father of transcendental psychology. And he has what's called a BPM model, and I expound on that for my third level of the subconscious. We're going to talk about the victim, rescue, perpetrator triad. I'm going to link that back to the mistress in the relationship from Truth is in the Triangle, my original 7 gates theory of the mother, father, child triad. So I told you Tuesday, we're going to tie everything together in this class. So a moment about the astronomy. Pluto, you might know, was sort of made a microplanet. I believe it was Neil deGrasse Tyson several years ago. Astrologers still consider Pluto a major planet because of the impact and this function that it has in the psyche. Pluto is the only other planet that has white-capped mountains other than Earth. This is super important for the psyche. All spirituality happens in a cave or on a mountaintop. So that's a very interesting point there. It creates methane frost. They're like ice crystals. They get very, very, very hard. I don't know if you've ever been up north when it's like snowing or very, very cold. These ice crystals, like you try to rip them off the ledge of the roof, and they're like very, very hard. They can cut you. Well, that's what Pluto is. Basically, try to birth yourself through these like frost icicles. That's what it's going to feel like. It feels like it's like killing you and scratching your body, your brain, your psyche, your emotional life. That's the feeling of Pluto when you go through Pluto transits. And again, we'll tie into BPM as the fetus is coming through the birth canal. Pluto takes 264 years to go around the solar system, so none of us will ever see a full Pluto transit. It's impossible to tolerate very, very strong Pluto transits for a very sustained period. They usually last about 2 years. So similar to the Saturn transits or the skinny cows, this 2-year mark when people are going through a divorce or people are going through illness or people are going through, finding balance again after a disrupting life experience is linked to these Pluto and Saturn transits. So the laws we're going to keep going back to this month are principle of mentalism, all is mind, because this is all in your mind. Principle of correspondence, as within, so without. Basically, all those criminals or whatever the criminal or perpetrator is in your life, whether it's food or sex or your parents or your friends or your boss, are you. The law of octaves, I'm going to go into some major symbolism with the law of octaves. The law of rhythm, of course, with the pendulum swings and how to get to 0 to 100 and how to get to 48 to 52. We're going to focus on what are called the transgenerational planets, which are Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto. So they're the end part of that spiritual adulting map. Black Moon Lilith is not on here. She's ultimately the goal, but these are the ones we're going to focus on today. I will bring her in a bit. In the Age of Aquarius, you hear me say this, you are a child of no one. The universe doesn't have your back. It responds when you have your own back. This is the concept of dethroning God. The God divine is in you, and the God in the cosmic consciousness, part of you responds when you have your own back. The whole Age of Aquarius, the whole purpose of this month is to speak to that So we don't keep assuming that there's some rescuer or savior archetype that's coming. It's you and you're here. Through Pluto, you can have your own back instead of self-betrayal. Pluto is linked to the harshest things. It's linked to greed and envy and self-betrayal and all these things that obviously affect us. And it's because we're in a constant state of self-betrayal by wearing masks. So the whole purpose is for Pluto to sort of blow up here the snow globe. In Neptune, the illusion, that innocent archetype, and then you become the magician. And when you're in the flow of the universe, you actually feel like you're a magician, like your life is magic. So all of us wanting that Wizard of Oz behind the veil, so to speak, when we remove the veils like Dorothy, that's when we actually realize we've had the red slippers all the time and your life begins to flow and you quote unquote get back home with Chiron, which is the next step, and then to Black Moon Lilith. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different mythologies right now. During the month, we'll touch back, but I want you to kind of have the cluster of myths. So she's from Hindu mythology. She's considered darkness, goddess of darkness and beyond time, destruction, goddess of destruction, darkness of nothingness. I need to bring you back, and here you see her third eye. I told you that in the chakra, the sixth chakra, there is a void. And I said, you are a child of the void. That void is the universe. That's your throne. Your mom and dad, the petals on the right and left side of the chakra, indicate that mom and dad are with you at all times. They gave you your family. They gave you your value system. They gave you your genetics and so forth. But the void is your throne, is your kingdom. That nothingness is Kali's territory. That nothingness is Pluto's domain. So this is what we're talking about. That is for nobody but you and your divine nature. So we have to dethrone God this month. It is from dark nothingness that pure consciousness exists. Only when we go into that nothingness that we view as grief, depression, violation, betrayal, whatever it is that the crime is in your life that lived in the earthly domain that you actually lived, in your psychological sphere, it really takes you to such darkness that only from there can pure consciousness emerge. So we have to look at the destructive aspects of life and creation and break open that snow globe, that womb, come out of the birth canal. We have to do the same thing in our psyche so that we can actually birth ourselves. She brings destruction to all that is false. If anyone's into the tarot, there's a phenomenal card called the Tower. And it's basically the tower is just breaking in half and people are falling off the tower. That's what these archetypes are. That's what these myths are. You've got to basically crumble, lose it all, so that from there you can emerge the phoenix, which is another myth in association with these archetypes. Kali Mudra here, that's the motions of your hands, is a protection. She has a yantra on her hand. The yantra, I told you, is the symbol. We have it in the classroom of the way that the universe is created, the triangles, the circle, the squares. She's got a garland of skulls around her because, again, death. You have to die in order to be reborn into the cosmic consciousness, the pure consciousness. And she wears 51 to 53 skulls that are the number of letters of the Sanskrit alphabets. Om is the most common sort of Sanskrit letter. Those letters, when strung together, become mantras. And I told you that I listen to the Hanuman Chalisa each morning. And what they do is they vibrate in our energy body. They vibrate to sort of start creating movement in the energy flow so that we can seek change. She's always depicted with blue or black skin, and she's the one that destroys in order to bring new. Mary Magdalene, she was the prostitute. She had 7 demons living inside of her. Those 7 demons are related to the deadly sins, the veils that we wear that hopefully lead us to Black Moon Lilith to remove in what we call the striptease. She was the beloved of Jesus. She was supposedly the one who witnessed Jesus's resurrection, as the Black Moon Lilith and Pluto witness our resurrection. This is done in private, in the dark, in a grief period. She became the apostle to the apostles. This is important because when you get down and dirty in the psyche and you actually remove the veils, you realize that you are God, God is you, all is mine, the principle of mentalism. You don't dethrone God per se in the sense that you become the God, but you realize that you are one with the universal consciousness that we're calling God. She is considered the sacred feminine, and we're going to go much more into that next week. A lot of myths say that she carried Jesus's child. There's always, and you're going to see with the Inanna myth, there's always a birth of a new child symbolically whenever Pluto arrives, because you have to kill the old in order to birth the new. Inanna, my first book, The Seven Gates, is named for her. She's a Sumerian goddess, also known as Ishtar, also known as Lady or Goddess of the Sky. I've told you this myth before. She was the goddess of the heavens. Her sister asked her Ereshkigal to come visit her because Ereshkigal's husband had died. And as she descended into the lower world, she was ripped of all of her clothing, all of her jewelry. And she showed up naked at the funeral, and her sister hung her. This is actually the original story of Jesus, and she was hung on a butcher's hook, and she actually had a baby. She was pregnant. So again, this theme of death and rebirth, super important this month. This is what this is. Heroskamos was performed at all of her temples, and we're going to go deep into the symbolism of the Heroskamos, which I explained in The Truth is in the Triangle, but we're going to go deeper. So it's the descent to the underworld, which Pluto rules, and it's the seven gates. There's always that symbolism of seven, the descent, which then leads to the ascent, bringing to the light, and you're going to see this over and over again. Morgana, she's from the Arthurian legends. She was considered a pagan, a druid in the Celtic culture. Those were sort of like the sorcerers or the witches, the ones that the priestesses of that time. She's part of the Sisterhood of Nine. You're going to see a lot of symbolism with nine as well. 7 to 9 is going to be common. When I gave you the Enneagram, the number family, in numerology, it's always 1 to 9. 9 is the number of wisdom, and 9 is the number of endings. And in all endings, in all crisis, in all destruction, there is a wisdom. These spirits are considered water spirits, the Sisterhood of Nine, and they inhabited mystical marshy lands outside of Glastonbury that led you to the magical Isle of Apples. We see theme of apples a lot. If you slice open an apple, you're going to see 5 seeds. The 5 is the number of spiritual growth. It's the pentagram that a lot of these sort of occult sciences that we consider witchcraft and evil use, and it's linked to this. And there's always magic. Anything associated with all of these gods or goddesses always linked to magic, because what they're telling you is find the magic within. The magic within is combining your spiritual aspect and your material aspect. And then this Isle of Apples led you to Avalon, which is the other world. So again, the cosmic consciousness. She learned magic from Merlin. We're going to see Merlin in a moment. And the symbolism here is the raven. If you ever watch Game of Thrones, you see the crows or the ravens delivering messages. Okay, so symbolically, we have an inner raven, if you will, that lives in the dark. You see this a lot in fairy tales. Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty had one as well. Merlin was considered to have gone mad. A lot of times witches, pagans, priestesses, wizards are considered mad. It's not that we're mad, it's that we see the truths and the realities of the universe, and we speak about a whole other sort of consciousness. So when I tell you earthly Francis or spiritual Francis, which one do you want? That's what I'm referring to. I can see both sort of levels of consciousness. So that's why a lot of times people in this realm are considered like a little crazy. Now, I've told you before, some people leave the body. That's dissociation and delusion, illusions of grandeur, narcissism, very common in this. That is not what this is. This is being balanced in both spirit and matter like Jesus. He had the gift of prophecy and intuition. He hid under the apple tree. Again, you're going to see that a lot. Every guy, every king, every man of power had a wizard or a mentor by their side. There could have been a physical person, but it was the idea that you listened to your inner guidance, you listened to your inner wizard that led you to the answers. In paganism, there's symbolic green man, and he represents the cycles of winter to spring. And that's a theme you're going to see a lot in this. Winter is sort of Pluto, the underworld, death and dying. In the myth of Persephone, I told you that she was stuck with Pluto during fall and winter, and then she came out to be with her mother in the spring and summer. He was considered a prophet, in charge of the woods. The woods and wilderness always represent the inner psyche, the wildness of self, the inability to access the truth of our psyche. Sorcerer, magi, wise man, and you see the magi and the wise man in the story of Jesus. You're going to see a lot of overlap. Buddha taught non-attachment. Pluto is the force in our psyche, our archetype, that forces us to have non-attachment. It is always linked to abrupt endings, whether it's widow, death, grief, breakups, car accidents, losing a limb, however it is teaching you non-attachment. We are not here to have closure with everyone. That is nonsense. That is something that I hear people say all the time. I had no closure. You need these abrupt endings to understand that we have to move into the transition of next. It's a death cycle. There's no closure. When someone is dying, they die, they leave. You can never access them again. So if you've ever had an abrupt ending, it is definitely a Pluto, and it is trying to get your attention to be non-attached. And non-attached does not mean only material. It could be desires, it could be thoughts, it could be emotions. There is a little Buddha story that there were two monks walking, and they came across a puddle, and there was a woman who needed to get carried over the puddle. One of the monks picked her up, carried her over the puddle, put her down, and kept walking. About 10 minutes later, the monk that didn't carry her looked over to the other monk and said, "We're ascetics, you're not supposed to touch women." And he's like, "The thing is, I left her back there and you're still carrying her." The thing we mostly carry is our thoughts. That is the problem. Thoughts are linked to desires and emotions. And this is what we need to get detached from. And Pluto transits are very, very hard. They're called debts for a reason. Attachment, Buddha said, is the root of all suffering. So rapes, endings, once you become sexually active, you can never become virginal again. These are things that you have to let go of. Once you're birthed, you can't go back into the womb. We're going to talk about Cerberus, the three-headed dog I've told you before, is thoughts, emotions, and desires. These are the personality. When we did personality class, theories of personality, it's linked to our thoughts, emotions, and desires. We actually become our true self with a capital S, STD, if you saw the spiritual STD lecture, when we say, think, and do. We don't eradicate thoughts, emotions, and desires. We learn to control them so that they don't control us, and they only are sort of aware or around, let's say, 48 to 52% of the time, because then we're acting with our neocortex, with Athena, the rational, and of course Hephaestus, the intuitive. The perpetrators of the mind need to be raped to lead to stillness. Everything about Buddhism is stillness, stillness of the mind. Nothing disturbs you except your thoughts, emotions, and desires. These are the perpetrators that keep your pond waters very unstill. Saturn, father of Pluto, tries to help us, but we don't always do the work. Sometimes we really need one of those severe criminals, those severe rapists in our life, symbolic, please, I'm specifying that, so that we actually will achieve the stillness. Jesus, Yeshua, Joshua, he is an example. He was our earthly example, Buddha too, that we can achieve Christ consciousness or spiritual consciousness while still living as human. The perpetrator of the mind, emotions, and desires is the fact that we're impure. I've told you our impurest thought, the secret, the vault We keep it for our parents. We build our life around this value that is not our version of the value. Jesus is here to show you, and you can still be dirty, you know, you need to sleep and poop and have sexual desires, and you can still have Christ consciousness. That's when we talk about balance of spirit and matter. You can connect to your own kingdom, third chakra of heaven within yourself, manning your fires in the third chakra. I told you the third chakra is obviously linked to the sixth chakra, which is the kingdom. And mom and dad are side by side, but no one is saving you, okay? They told us that he was the savior and that he was the son of God. We're not children, we are divine, it's in us. We have the right to own this Christ consciousness. It is only through Pluto that we can even get close to the Christ consciousness. It's the only thing that leads us in the spiritual adulting map to Black Moon Lilith. Pan. This is Pan here. Pan is the only Greek god that actually dies. This is extremely symbolic. It means something in you has to die. It also means that the material body, the one that has the desires, he particular is linked to sex, but any desires from the second chakra, child, mother, protection needs, money, everything has to die. Give Caesar's what is Caesar's. Give the earth what is the earth's. That all has to die. He was worshipped in caves. I told you that all spirituality happens in caves or on mountaintops. Pan means all. We all die. We all die the moment we take our first breath. We're leading to death, but we all have to die. Something in us has to die in terms of spiritual consciousness in this lifetime. That's why when people say, oh, life is hard, or everything in life is painful, or everyone has pain, it's referring to that we have to die. Our body is the number one source of attachments, whether it's desires, emotions, or thoughts, and that is part of the body and has to die. He was also known to have sayings like time to pay the piper, the Pied Piper. And I tell you, we have to pay offerings. We don't have to pay sacrifices. But we think that we have to give very hefty prices and pay in sacrifices. And I hope to teach you that a small offering of an obol is sufficient for the underworld. Pandemonium, and we just came out of pandemic, comes from this word. So obviously something during the pandemic, unfortunately there were people that died, something in our psyches had to die. This is linked to our collective unconscious. Hippolyta. I told you about the myth of the Amazons where they would rip off their right breast and they would hold their baby with their left. This was the law of gender, trying to balance the masculine and the feminine. Hippolyta actually wore a chastity belt, and she only took off the chastity belt when she invited men on the island. And I told you that the men were invited so that they can penetrate, so that they can have babies. The chastity belt is one of the origins of the Virgin Mary. We're going to go more into depth with that and the importance of the church putting a chastity belt on us so that we wouldn't know the secrets of the prostitute, of the Black Moon Lilith, and of the penetrator. She's considered the queen of the Amazons. That chastity belt actually belonged to Aphrodite. Aphrodite, I've told you, has two versions. Aphrodite Pandemia is the second chakra linked to Eros and erotic desires and sex. And Aphrodite Urania has to do with the fourth chakra, which is love thy neighbor, agape love. We cannot get there unless we have self-love in the third chakra. Hercules killed her, and we'll go more in depth of that. This is the reason we swing 0 to 100, because we wear this chastity belt in our psyche. Pluto is the only one that leads us to transcendence, to try to get to the 48 to 52. The Hydra, you're going to hear a lot about the Hydra this month. The Hydra had 9 heads. You've heard me talk about this before. This was the central head. You have one main bad bucket item. You have one main impure thought. When you bring that to the light, a la luz, when you're born, Lucifer, Jesus, the bringer of light, everything that we hear, we can actually transmute. And you need fire to transmute. I told you Prometheus stole the fire from the gods and was the only way that we can transmute. Cerberus, the three-headed dog that guards the underworld. I told you it's thoughts, desires, and emotions. This is the material nature of man. This is the Jesus, the man aspect, that if we have only 48 to 52% of the time, then we actually leave room for spirit the other 48 to 52% of the time. On my 12 truths of the spiritual path, these are the first 3 truths. Without the first three truths, you can't lead to intuition that then leads you to self, etc., etc. So this is where most of my clients I see stay. It's still linked to awareness. We're nowhere near integration or doing it differently, but it's a big aspect in terms of the spiritual path. And Pluto. So this is a name we're going to kind of use collectively this month because it's the archetype name that I use. Or Hades, you're going to hear Pluto and Hades. I use Pluto primarily, is linked to all of these archetypes. This is the guy. This is all of them in one archetype. So no matter if you say Kali, if you say Jesus, if you say Lucifer in the Kabbalah, if you say Malkuth, it's in every tradition. He is considered the wealthy one. He is also known as Dispater, and he rules minerals. We will talk about psychological and physical homeostasis through the glands and the minerals this month. He is the son of Kronos, which is Saturn. He has a three-headed dog there. They are Cerberus, and they guarded the underworld, and he guards the underworld. So he is the great equalizer. Saturn is divine justice. At the moment of conception, you're giving your karma from your past lives. However, Pluto is death. Pluto is stage 3 of the subconscious that is the great equalizer, and we all get in this lifetime to choose to pay our debts. So karma is sort of how you're being given your story, but you get to decide how you're going to show up in your free will. The Pluto transits, these criminals that show up in your life that are from your psyche, are in an attempt for you to pay your debt, your karmic debt, once and for all, so you stop reincarnating. Saturn is the skinny cows I told you, so these valor years and neutralizer years are to help you try to not swing. If you are not doing this on your own, Pluto comes to slap you in the head, so it forces you to have a sudden ending, a sudden death. In France, they call it petit mort, the orgasm. It's linked to the 8th house and death and Pluto. Every single time we're dealing with sexuality at the subconscious level, at the physical level, that's the low vibration consciousness. We'll get to that. You're talking about deaths, small deaths, so that you can lead the biggest transition of your life, which is your death out of the body. This leads you to Lilith through Chiron. Obviously, orgasms happen in the body, illnesses happen in the body, feelings happen in the body. What I hope is that we don't have to keep getting super, super sick and violating our bodies in order to get from Pluto to Lilith. Learning to die is the lesson of life. I gave you that Stages of Grief lecture from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that ultimately that's the lesson. Non-attachment, according to Buddha, is what we're here to learn. Pluto cycles force you into non-attachment because attachment is the moon sign, the emotions, the way you view the world, the false veil, the false snow globe you live in. And there's no gods but you, and we're going to see that. So we're going to dethrone God this month, okay? I told you that your parents are God in your psyche. In the Western world, we have a God linked to the parents in the 10 Commandments. Obey thy mother and thy father. So it's very much linked to our Western philosophy. And in the Eastern world, I told you, it's linked to the seat of consciousness in the 6th chakra. We need to dethrone God. The only way that we can dethrone God is through Pluto, aka Satan. That's why they use these words in Christianity. In order to release the secret from your vault that you hold in your psyche, and you build your whole life around this false premise and this false value system that, again, doesn't take all that money. You have to do it your way. You need these Pluto transits to dethrone your parents. You hold the secret in your thoughts, your emotions, and your desires. Your body is obviously formed from the impure thought at conception. It materializes into your body. That's why Chiron is the step right before releasing the secret. You need to release it through your body. I've taught you the difference between emotion and feelings. You must feel your feelings so you can liberate this unpure thought through the body and then seek real truth. This keeps you in child. This keeps you in fight or flight, linked to the reptilian and the limbic system of the brain that we talked about. Once you breathe freely, think about leaving the womb, the first thing you do is breathe and you scream. This is the process of adulting and, of course, spiritual adulting. You process emotion fully. You stop holding your breath. You stop living in child. You stop not feeling it. You feel it. You get sick. You scream. You grieve it. And you can come into the world anew, the resurrection of Jesus. When you're physically born, your transition into the world, you're raped, obviously, by the world. We talked about that. And then your whole job is to dethrone God, which is your mom linked to the breath when we decide to adult in the third step, and the moon I mentioned before. Only when you dethrone God can you be rebirthed. The rebirth is linked to Jesus and Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a spiritual teacher. When Jesus says you need to be reborn, Nicodemus says, I can't go back into the womb of my mother. That's a very, very telling statement in the body, in the Bible, because that's what we think we can do. We think we can go back to the womb of Neptune, back into the toxic waters. You can't. When you're rebirthed from Pluto, you cannot go back. That snow globe has shattered. That train has left the station. Pluto is linked to the 7 deadly sins. However, it is not the deadly sins. It is linked to it with the impure thought, but you only really see the truth with the Black Moon Lilith. But this is where you get the beginning of doing that striptease. And Chiron, like I said, leads you to illness or an emotional illness because you have to let go of the lie that you've been holding in the vault for your parents, aka the cave, and return home to self. When we did the pineal gland and the pituitary gland, I explained that there is a cave in the brain. It's all symbolic. It's where Hercules kills the Nemean lion. You see the lions here in the Stairway to Heaven. You've got to tame the personality so that the soul can do its divine will. That's in the STD lecture. Lilith we'll get to, and she actually is the one that leads you to liberation. Lilith is the only person in mythology that ever said to God, we are equal. When you do this process, you dethrone God because there is no hierarchy. This notion of a stairway is false. There's no hierarchy in the universe. The universe doesn't have your back. The universe is in you and simply responds when you have your own back. We have to get out of this notion that we are a child of anyone. That's why Lilith is liberation. When you liberate the lie, you liberate Lilith, you liberate the deadly sins, you love yourself despite your flaws, and this nonsense of a stairway is ended. You're face to face with God like Lilith, and you say, we are equal. Again, you're a spark of the universe. You are not all of the universe. Do not think I'm telling you that you are the end all be all. So in the Bible, there is a jealous God, and then there is a compassionate God. This is super important with our perpetrator, victim, rescuer archetype. The jealous God says, you shall not make for yourselves an idol. Parents are your idol. They're your gods. It's not the golden cow when Moses comes from the burning bush on Mount Sinai. He's talking about your idols are your parents, nor any image that is in the heavens. So it's not Uranus, or it's not Saturn that's on Earth, or it's not the water, which is Neptune. You shall not bow yourself down to them, for I am a jealous God. Pluto is the god of jealousy at the low vibration. He is saying, if you go to the depths of your psyche, you will learn that you are God, that you have that spark, and you will liberate yourself. Visiting the iniquity of your fathers on the 3rd and 4th generation. This is super important. This planet, Pluto, this archetype is linked to transgenerational and ancestral traumas of 3 and 4 generations past. Everyone in their family lineage has a rapist, a slave owner, an abuser, incest. This exists in our psyche. The criminals that give you the chills in the criminal justice system are in your psyche and in your lineage. And the only way to liberate ourselves of that, of the trauma that we in sort of incurred put onto others and in our own psyche, is to liberate this jealous God, this Pluto, this subconscious archetype that we refuse to go down and visit. Free the Jews, which is you, symbolically. You leave the oppressor. I talked to you about the oppressor when we have freedom. Of the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh is your parents. They oppress you. They keep you linked to their values, their thoughts. When you finally leave your mother and father, when you finally dethrone your parents, you're in the void, which is the wilderness. And the Jews were in the wilderness for 40 years. And I told you, usually don't start doing this sort of work and blowing up things until 40. The plagues are the offerings and the sacrifices you pay, and they're way too high. And it's all in an attempt to leave the symbolic Egypt, the slave, the mother, father, the womb. Iniquity means immoral or gross behavior. This is the impure thought. This is what we're holding ourselves to. This is the crime. Pluto helps you with non-attachment, and hopefully you can confront your ego, become humble, and look at pride and the other deadly sins. So these are God archetypes and the victim, perpetrator, rescuer triangle. So you're going to see, of course, the triangle because it's always about the triangle. There is no one above and no one below. He says this. It is you. It's within you. Don't go to the heavens. Don't go to the earth. Don't go to the oceans. It's within you, he says. I am the jealous God. You have to man your fires. You have to look at your perpetrator of your thoughts. We are now in the age of Aquarius. Jesus was the age of Pisces, and prior to the age of Pisces was the age of Aries, which was ruled Scorpio, and Aries are linked together as an old ruler. Then in the age of Pisces, we got a compassionate God. So here's compassion, and here's the perpetrator. So these are the two gods we're struggling with, and you're going to see in a moment the 0 to 100 themes, okay? Jesus was sent, God's only son, to die. I told you the other day, we use our children, okay, subconsciously. We keep them from feeding and flying. We lose custody like I did. We have fertility issues. We lose our children to death and war. Mental illness is a way of obviously losing our children, abandoning our children in an attempt to seek God. That is too high of a price. That perpetrator is too high of a price. We do not need to give our children. Even Abraham was said, put Isaac to die, and even God said, no, you proved your loyalty. We have got to stop the nonsense. I told you the other day that there was a Greek tradition, I forgot the name, but it's called exposure. The Greeks would leave their children in the fields to die. The mother would have the baby, look to the father and say, what do you think? I guess he was assuming if it was his, if the baby looked like him, that he said, okay, we'll keep him. And if the baby didn't, he assumed it was infidelity and he wasn't going to raise some other guy's kid. And he left him in the fields to die. And this is called exposure. There's a lot of symbolism in that word. You have to expose this, the truth of what this is. That's what the Hansel and Gretel story I told you, the original, that mom and dad left Hansel and Gretel in the forest to die. And then it was, rewritten to indicate a stepmother. We have this potential in us. We do this. It is in our programming. Here, Neptune is the rescuer. So now you have a perpetrator that no longer exists. The perpetrator is some crime, some evil force in your life that raped you, that stole from you, broke into your car, took your spouse, took your husband, and now God comes to save you. He's the rescuer. This is very, very, very dangerous to have this as the setup of our psyche, because then you're constantly looking for someone to come and rescue. This is where the magic comes in, this idea of the magician. People are enamored in the spiritual arena. I've told you about the series, the one that promises you everything. I had a client the other day who went to Mexico and was promised this super cheap timeshare, and of course he was duped. You're always duped by the savior. There is no savior. It does not exist. It's you. And the problem with these two archetypes of thinking that there's a jealous God and a God that's compassionate, that's going to save you and rescue you, is it leaves you as a victim. And so you're always this victim waiting to get abused and saved, abused and saved. And people live in this 0 to 100 nonsense. I have symbolism here of a question mark. This rescuer savior is an enigma. It's found in riddles. It's found in religion if you don't know how to read the texts, and it's found in your psyche. So in the age of Aquarius, you are the child of no one. You're the one you've been waiting for. You are the rescuer and savior. You've always been the rescuer. And if you go back to your story at birth, you thought you rescued mom. And so what do is you go through life attempting to rescue supposedly fourth chakra lie. It's not, meeting other people's needs in the face of selfless, which doesn't exist, in hopes that someone will be your savior, your rescuer, and meet your needs. So this doesn't happen. You have to do it for yourself. And we're going to talk probably next week about the Hieros Gamos, which is then when you do it for yourself and you become the Christ consciousness, you balance your spirit and your matter, then you can be the receptacle for others to do the same. So this is linked to the question mark. So just look at the curvature of the question mark, and I have some symbolism here. First, I want to talk about the law of octaves. The law of octaves, I've told you that the universe is an enigma in the sense that we don't get to see the face of God, hence the veil of Isis or the burning bush of Moses. But the law of correspondence and the law of octaves gives us a glimpse. I've also told you that my guidance says that music, math, and metaphysics is the language of the universe, and it says the same thing. I'm not a mathematician or a musician, I'm a metaphysician, but I can see the symbolic overlaps. This is the F clef. Look at the curvature. I'm going to take you to a slide in a moment. This is the staff. Very important. The lower staff, which is where the bass clef is compared to the treble clef in music, is linked to the lower nature or the animal nature of us. This is our lower nature. This is also a staff indicating the lines, straight lines, only exist in the earthly realm. Curvature is the only thing that exists in the spiritual realm. So again, this is the spirit and the matter in the musical notation. It's that spiritual curvature, the Christ consciousness in the earthly realm that is lines. I told you about the law of octaves in the sense of going from child to adult or teenager to adult and changing and transmuting consciousness. I've told you that the first shock is between do, re, mi, and then linked to fa, where we can stop, think, breathe, and say, oh, I want to make good choices, and call in Athena and Hephaestus. Pluto is linked always to shocks, sudden endings, abrupt endings, no closure. We need crisis in our life in order to seek our Christ consciousness and to understand that we are the Savior that we are looking for. This is all linked to that transition at birth. The number 4 is a crisis in numerology, and this is 4 from mi to fa, the number 4. The question mark actually its origins is linked to a cat's tail. So the question mark, cat's tail, is all about detachment, the animal, the cat, and there's a great book by Marie von Franz that talks all about the symbolism of the cat. It's about detachment, again, non-attachment, which was Buddha said. I think it was Sir Isaac Newton that identified colors to the musical scale, and here is Fa, which is the fourth, green. Green is the color of the fourth chakra, the agape love. Without a crisis, without a perpetrator, without you rescuing yourself, you cannot ever possibly be or give unconditional or agape love to absolutely anybody. So it requires a shock, it requires a crisis, it requires you owning the thought that built your entire material life for you to do this work. The question mark is also the word quaestio, which was shortened to quo. And quo is the idea of stopping the status quo. The only thing that gets you out of the mass consciousness, the snow globe, the moon, the mother, your mom and dad as gods, is a crisis. And when we ask a question, we actually change the voice of our tone. So it goes lower. We're actually going lower and deeper into wisdom when we ask questions. That's why in your field, therapy, asking the right question elicits the response from the client. Super important. So this is some symbolism. This is Pluto. This is the Omega. This is the clef. This is the question mark. And this is the Fibonacci spiral. You've seen the Fibonacci spiral. I've told you it's upward and onward. It's the Jupiter cycles. It's our spiritual growth. In the Bible, it says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. The Alpha is a capital A. It's a straight line. Think of the staff of the notes here. And the Omega is this symbol that's circular. Anything that's circular, that's spherical, has to do with the Omega, with God, with the spirit. And look at Pluto, has the circle of spirit, another creature here, and then the cross of matter. All of them have some indicator of the cross of matter, the lines. This exclamation point should be, technically it's a cat's tail. And of course you see the square lines within the spiral. They have to be together. Man and matter, spirit and matter always have to be together in order to birth us whole. That's the story of Jesus. Everything here has to do with the end. Omega is the end. Death is an ending. You must end something in yourself. You must have a crisis. You must have a death, psychologically, subconsciously. Life is here now. We are not here to grow for an afterlife. We are here to grow spiritually now. I told you last week, you cannot grow spiritually out of the body. Your soul goes to the vibration of the loka or the plane of the universe until your next reincarnation. This is the Hebrew word emet, which means truth or hidden truths, because again, all of this has to be deciphered. And the first and last letter meet smack in the middle of 14. And I've told you that we stop our spiritual path with our parents at 14. This is when our values kick in, when we try to dethrone our parents. Of course, they don't let us, but we try to leave the snow globe because it's in the truth. We have to find our own truth. We have to find our own value systems. There's 28 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. 28 means power and energy. You have to find your own personal inner power of your third chakra, which is the fire element of energy. And moon cycles are 28 days. And the truth is the power, the energy to fight the transition to get out of the womb. The same thing happens during your transitions of life. So here's the spiritual adulting map. And now you see we're here. We're at Pluto. So Uranus at 42, you blew up your life. You try to seek some sort of universal consciousness. The toxic waters hopefully go away. You're trying to seek real spiritual truths. Now, some people have these Pluto transits at a very, very young age, and they have these rapes or these perpetrators very young. Obviously, in the psyche, it's at the moment of transition through the birth canal or upon birth. So it's in our psyche, like everything, at the moment of conception, then we live it out in our story. For the client, and I do have a slide on practical application so you know how to apply this in your practice, is when you're going to ask clients about abrupt endings or crisis or betrayal or rape or anything that leads to this darkness. And it could be mental illness, physical illness, a situation where there was an abrupt ending, and so forth. This is only the point that you will then lead to the true spiritual adult. Over here, you're still just an adult. There are people that stay here. They have crisis, they look for the savior. They have crisis, they look for the savior, and they're in this nonsense forever, just like people that are in the restriction. Pluto, you're automatically a spiritual adult. What was that? Oh, I thought I heard someone. So let's talk a little bit about archetypes. The death is the great equalizer. Pluto, transition at the moment of conception, obviously, but when we get through the birth canal, the moment we take our first breath, we're already dying. Just a side note for those of you who like this sort of information and may work with people that are struggling, and I have channeled many miscarried, aborted, stillbirth souls, that is a lifetime. Even though they had a shortened lifetime, that was considered a lifetime. That's linked to Lilith, and this was a death for that soul, but it was considered a lifetime. So they did experience, because of the moment of conception, they did experience a quote-unquote lifetime. So just so you know. From the moment we're born, we're dying. Pluto, I told you, is the son of Saturn. Saturn are those skinny cows that prepare us for the Pluto biggie, which is death, and of course, all of those along the way. Our first Saturn cycle 0 to 7 in our story, in our snow globe, and that first cracking of the snow globe links back to Pluto and what we're going to have to go through. Uranus, the cosmic consciousness, we're castrated by Saturn. Saturn is dethroned by Jupiter. Neptune is the womb, and Pluto says, I got to clean you up so that I can get you back home into the cosmic consciousness. So I have the little map here. I left Chiron and Black Moon out of it because today we're pretty much focused on this cycle, and then we'll add on the Chiron and the Black Moon later on. So again, universal womb, castrated at conception. The soul is the attempt. Jupiter is the soul. If we clean it up, our personal myth, we perpetrate so we can grow, but we treat ourselves like a criminal. This is where we get stuck in this perpetrator snow globe concept with Neptune and Pluto right here. And then if we actually do the work, we can return home to the cosmic consciousness. So there's positive or low vibration and high vibration for each of the archetypes. So we've said cosmic consciousness and the nonsense of being free, you know, with money, with our liberty and our marriage. No, it has to do with our thoughts. But it's chaos we create in order to seek the freedom of our thoughts, emotions, and desires. So the non-attachment. Saturn's the structure, it's the body. You can have restricting or scarcity mindset, or you can understand that your body is a vehicle, a temple, and you keep it clean so that the spirit can sort of be a vessel through that body. Jupiter can be abundance. It could be financial, spiritual too, but it can also be escapism. So in a moment, I'm going to show you the 0 to 100s that people in practice do. The Neptune is the innocence, the delusions, the toxic waters, the womb, codependence, passive-aggressive manipulation. But at a high vibration, it's the union of body and spirit, and it's being here now. If you can bypass sort of the toxic waters and understand your Christ consciousness, that happens here. Usually doesn't happen. And then the Pluto is the perpetrator, the criminal, all transitions, sudden endings, forced detachments, and of course prepares us for our final death. So how do we live this out? So I'm using this, Uranus to Saturn, Saturn to Jupiter, Jupiter to Neptune, Neptune to Pluto, Pluto to Uranus. That's what I'm calling here, these 0 to 100s, okay? So basically that's what I have here, but not cyclical. People that stay, and I've told you this before, post 40, 42, they might liberate themselves of something. They go back to the nonsense of adulting and just living in freedom versus restriction. They take their vacation, you know, they spend their money frivolously, whatever they do, they stay there. People that stay in the 0 to 100 of Saturn, Jupiter, they're in a skinny cow, fat cow. They have material growth, spiritual growth, scarcity, abundance mentality. They continue 0 to 100. People that are in the Jupiter, Neptune, again, similar spiritual wealth and financial wealth, but they really have escapism. They tend to have a lot of toxic waters, poor coping, gluttony, food, alcohol. They live in delusion and a mental health, and they're seeking a rescuer. So the rescuer becomes Jupiter, which is the man that's going to pay my bills, or God. It rescues you, and oh, God got me the job, and God opened the path for me. Or God is your money, and someone pays your bills, or your money is viewed as your God. People that stay in the Neptune, Pluto 0 to 100 go between victim and perpetrator, victim and perpetrator. They're in constant crisis. These people, the minute they open their mouth, is something happened. Something every single time. I have a client like this. There is not one conversation that doesn't start with the police, that doesn't start with the prisons, that doesn't start with some psychological trauma. Someone is going crazy. It is a constant victim perpetrator archetype 0 to 100. And then Uranus, Pluto can actually be lived out by people that are incarcerated, that are in the criminal justice system, or yourself. You incarcerate yourself, you liberate yourself, you incarcerate yourself, you liberate yourself, and you're in this constant sort of prison and imprisonment cycle. So these are the 0 to 100s. Remember, you need a third force. So the world was divided in the myth by Jupiter. He got the largest piece, and this is extremely important. You want God or Jupiter, the rescuer, your savior, Jesus Christ, or whatever version of this nonsense you live, to rescue you. You're the rescuer. It's the biggest piece that Jupiter got for a reason. That is your most important role. Your mother was victim, the womb, so you try to go back into the womb, look at the world through that lens, or just stay there with your toxic water, poor coping skill. And your dad up here, it's symbolic, was the penis, was the perpetrator who stole the virginity. Again, it's Pluto who raped Persephone, right? So it's that mythology. It's not officially mom and dad. That's just part of how we live it out, whether it's mom or dad. And now you're the rescuer as the child, of course, and you're trying to stay in maiden for your mother because you can't leave her fly like Persephone couldn't leave her mom and needed a perpetrator to rape her so that she could actually get out of the delusion. The moon is the original mother. And again, I mean mother or father. Your father could have been the nurturer. Your father could have been the mother. The father is the one you have the wrong alliance. It does not mean mom or caretaker. Just know that that's what it is. I talked to you about attachment style. I talked to you about moon signs. We had that entire lecture. This is linked to gluttony at the psychological and emotional level. When we talk about attachment, it's not only things. You can be greedy emotionally, gluttonous emotionally, and you need the perpetrator to rape you so that you can get to non-attachment. So here are some physical symptoms, and you're going to see me kind of go back and forth this month with physical as I start talking about the glands and the minerals. So here, and some psychological as well. Freedom restriction people may have nervous system disorders, structural issues, or autism, or the parents are in this and they have a child with autism. Remember, it's the unintegrated shadow of the parents. The Saturn Jupiter can be hip issues, structural issues, obesity, knee issues, thigh issues, and liver issues. The Jupiter Neptune 0 to 100 be hip issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, feet problems, liver, obesity. Neptune Pluto people can have grief, mold, sex issues, reproductive issues, cancer, depression, suicide, feet problems, gallbladder, colon, rectum. And Pluto Uranus people can also have grief, mold issues, sexual issues, reproductive issues, suicide, nervous system issues. So you see some overlap depending obviously on the archetype. And this is not limited to this, but these are some broad strokes. All glands in the body are linked to Pluto transitions. I told you this the other day. Anytime that we're talking about hormones, and it's mainly women, but men too, We're talking about a Pluto transition in the psyche. You are trying to birth yourself new. We call it hormones or acne or puberty or menopause. Remember the triple goddess from maiden mother to crone, it's linked to the Pluto transitions. The hypothalamus is responsible for stopping the making of hormones. Again, transitions. Are you stopping something? Are you starting something? The pituitary gland has to do with making mom's milk, thyroid, oxytocin. Remember I talked to you about oxytocin, the attachment, style, the moon sign, estrogen. This is the need to leave the snow globe in the womb. So you've got pituitary issues. It's directly linked to you need to get out of the snow globe. You need to get raped to leave that nonsense. This will lead you, I told you in the pituitary lecture of the 48 to 52 Chiron and why illness is oftentimes included, the return home to self, which will then let you dethrone your parents. Your pineal gland is linked to melatonin. I told you that lecture as well. Linked to sleep, your light dark, which is your shadow aspects as well as your light aspects, and bringing the shadow aspects to the light, a la luz. And I ask, what keeps you up at night? When you don't have truth, you're kept up at night. The Hydra is part of that 9-headed monster I showed you, and we'll talk more about that this month. And there's a great little fairy tale called The Princess and the Pea. There's a tiny, look at the pineal gland, tiny little pea that's stuck under her mattress, and she cannot sleep. It is that much. It is whatever truth you are keeping that keeps you up at night. The thyroid, parathyroid is linked to metabolism, bone health, again, structure, minerals, Pluto. We're going to go deeper into that. Minerals are Pluto's domain. The thymus here, and it's above the heart. The thymus is linked to the immune system, and it shrinks after puberty. Does anyone want to take a guess why the thymus shrinks after puberty? You no longer need the providing surveillance and protection function of the thymus. God, aka mom and dad, do not need to watch you any longer. You are now spiritually, emet, truth, according to Hebrew and the spiritual philosophy at 14, allowed to seek your own value system. It's not needed in the later years. Parents are not needed spiritually, not materially. And it helps you fight invaders. Your parents, the impure thoughts you're keeping from them, are the invaders. It's above your heart. Your heart has to do with your home. Your adrenals keep you in fight or flight. We've talked about that at length. Pancreas is linked to digestive issues, insulin, glucagon, sugar. Sugar is directly linked to mom, food, and it's also linked to disgust. Ovaries and the testes, breast, anything to do with menstruation or testicles have to do with Perpetrator, Pluto. And if you have any of those issues, it's directly linked to needing to seek the truth and having a transition in your life. So some of the psychological symptoms that come with these 0 to 100s, mood disorders and anxiety disorders. Again, general, I'm not saying that the specificity, we can go deeper into the specifics. So these are sort of general broad strokes. The Saturn, Jupiter, eating disorders, depression, Jupiter, moon, substance abuse disorders, anything, Neptune, anything to do with Neptune, the snow globe, the toxic waters, has to do with addiction or codependence or passive aggressive. Neptune, Pluto, you're looking at personality disorders, psychotic disorders, trauma-related disorders, substance abuse disorders. And if you're in the Pluto, Uranus archetype, you're looking at anxiety disorders and trauma disorders. So this can give you some feedback when a client speaks and you start to listen symbolically and archetypally what they're actually saying or what the 0 to 100 that needs the help for the 48 to 52. The transcendence function, negative feedback, Pluto, and the 48 to 52. So these 0 to 100 swings are an attempt to not be found out, FOFO, fear of being found out. So we build our life on one entire value system in an attempt to hide the other. Carl Jung spoke about the transcendence function. The transcendence function is Pluto. You need a Christ, you need a disruptor. In cybernetics, so he says tension between the opposites, and again, he was a metaphysician and he knew the law of rhythm and the law of the pendulum. Cybernetics is a systems theory, and all I do is systems theory, and it talks about the feedback loop that self-corrects. Saturn and Jupiter cycles every 7 years and 12 years, and the fat cows and the skinny cows is how you grow spiritually. But if you are lollygagging, you need a major disruptor. You need a Pluto to come and rape you so that you can see clearly if this is not doing it for you. You will create this in your psyche to get you out of the Saturn and Jupiter cycles if it's not sufficient. This is why in the spiritual adulting map, it's later. This is where the conscious and the unconscious meet. That's why they're the chthonic gods of the underworld, and they come to the forefront. Our criminal justice system and the criminals in our society is to make that subconscious conscious. This is my 48 to 52. Pluto is responsible for the attempt to reconcile opposites. You can try to get back into the womb. You can try to get back into the innocence. The psyche is very powerful. But usually after this level of crisis, we go into grief through the body, suffer some mental illness, depression, or physical illness that leads us to the truth of Lilith. This is ruled obviously by the law, or the law of rhythm. You need Pluto to achieve psychological homeostasis healthily. I told you, the body will keep you in an unhealthy state of psychological homeostasis. But this is what we need in order to actually really get into homeostasis. The oscillations in the system are the 0 to 100. And what happens, it's the direct opposite of the original disturbance. If you need to swerve off the road, you go 0 to 100 and you swerve in the complete other direction. And every time you do those 0 to 100 swerves, it is called damping out, and it's an attempt to create some lag time of 48 to 52 so then the system can readjust. If you are not readjusting okay with Saturn, Jupiter, you need a Pluto to force you into a new readjustment. Neptune is the adaptation, the protection mechanism. So I said, you want to go back into that womb, you want to go back into that toxic waters, you have that choice, it's free will, but it keeps you in prison, and it keeps you in moon, and it keeps you attached, and it keeps you with your low-level consciousness. Every system needs a boundary, and we talk obviously at length with the 48 to 52 being the boundary, and homeostasis shows you that you're resilient when a disruptor comes into the system and you can actually survive from that. So we have a few minutes left, and I'm going to talk about the sneakiness and then we'll wrap up. So you are a sneaky criminal. Why do you do quote unquote bad things? Why do you have bad characters in your life? This is a low level vibration of Pluto. You're trying to get out of under the eyes of God. This idea that is all-knowing God, mom and dad, why you started lying in the first place, I told you at a very young age, is linked to trying to get away from God. So we do these sneaky Pluto, low-level Pluto things to try to get under the eyes of God. Well, when you dethrone God and you realize that it's you creating all this, you can actually go to a high vibration and go straight to the truth. Hopefully you can bypass Chiron here with illness, or at least have a mild illness. This is an attempt every time you sneak or see someone sneaky or judge a sneaky behavior, it's you trying to get out of the snow globe, the illusion, the delusion. This is your emotions versus your feelings. Emotions keep you in child. You don't feel them. You hold your breath, or you fully feel, and then you're good. Emotions are sneaky, and they're there to get your needs met. It's pure child. Remember, I told you it's the secret language from the womb. It's your moon sign, and it's just used to manipulate. Feelings don't cause disease. when you have a Pluto and you feel it and you grieve it fully, the hope is that you could do that with the Saturn and you don't have to have a nonsense of a Pluto. But most people need this disruptor at this level so that they can actually grow. Your sneaky Scorpio and Pluto are the sneaky signs. The snow globe is all-knowing. That's your God. That's your rescuer. It is you. Once you leave the womb, once you realize that your mom is not God, it's you, you can stop lying. All you're doing is being a vault for your parents' secret thought. If you stop building your life on it, you attempt to blow that up at 40 to 42, and you start doing this, you will eventually spiritual adult and liberate that thought. And again, it's a la luz, to the light. And lastly, Pluto gives you the permission via the perpetrator. When I got Cancer the first time, I was like, oh, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now I have permission. This Cancer, this whatever rapes you, whatever forces you into this disruption, however you get to grieve it out in the open, you have an excuse now to shatter the snow globe. You can grieve in the car alone. No one's watching. You don't have to tell your mom everything. She's out of your head. You do not have to tell your parents everything. You have a right to your private thoughts. These are your pearls. I believe it was Jesus, I want to say in the Sermon on the Mount, said that don't give your pearls to swine. Pearls are your tears of joy shed by Aphrodite. Remember, eventually she leads you to self-love and agape love. You finally get to be the adult and not the child. This is Chiron. We talk about him next, linking us to Lilith after the Pluto disruptor, and he is the prophecy and truth. So we definitely get to the truth. We blow up the prophecy that was given to us at conception, and you can only heal your psychological imbalance with the truth. And the Ayurveda pillars are health, food, food, sleep, and truth. That's why the melatonin and the keeping up at night if you're not in truth. So to wrap up for today, the back door. The back door forces you, the perpetrator forces you out of the back door, which I told you was your descendant or your shadow or the unintegrated shadow of your parents. And then you can raise consciousness through the front door, through the ascendant. And we're going to get more into that on Tuesday. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to stop the recording and take attendance.